real warm welcome to everyone to this Centre for Global Higher Education webinar. We're just getting set up here in an underground room in our Department of Education, but welcome to wherever you're joining us from, and especially warm welcome to our presenters joining us from Centre for Studies of Higher Education at School of Public Policy in Berkeley, Igor Chilikov and John Aubrey-Douglas. It's a great pleasure to have you here to be talking to us all about this this multi-engagement model data set you have, looking at diverse pathways to student success. John and Igor will talk for 30-40 minutes. We'll record this going forward. Sorry about the slight noise in the background here. We'll mute our room. We're in a wind tunnel, I'm afraid. And there'll be lots of time, hopefully, at the end for questions. You can use the chat function. Looking forward to this, really interested in this data you've collected. It's been going on for a while. The screen's yours. Igor, John, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Great, David. Thanks so much for inviting us or letting us come onto your event schedule. We're really pleased to join you virtually. I'd like to these days start off by apologizing for all the crazy things going on in the US, the chaos, the bullying, the chest beating. And it's upsetting for us who care about international relations plus and democracy, things like that. So this is one of my beginning talking points. It's also, you may know that tonight is the State of the Union address, where the president gives every year or once a year a presentation before a speech before Congress. So anyway, that will be an interesting event tonight after Friday's overturning by the Supreme Court of this tariff regime. That will be another regime of some sort, but chaos will continue. So in any case, adrift or engaged, diverse pathways to student success at U.S. research universities. And this is a part of a much larger project called the Student Experience in the Research University Consortium. And this has been going on. We had various versions of surveys that we've been doing at the undergraduate and then the graduate student level for some, since 2002, if you can believe it or not. But the growth in terms of having major public universities in the group, American universities, and some international, has grown over time. So we have a really rich data set. So we're engaging in a talk that looks at longitudinal data. But next slide, Igor. So, what prompts us in this particular research endeavor that we're presenting here, which is kind of a big culmination of our efforts. Universities use the data. Igor will talk about it in various important ways: program review, various reports to governing boards, special kind of projects looking at like international students and their experiences and these kinds of things. But this particular research project that we have here kind of is a culmination of this longitudinal data set that Igor really put together, and then we looked at ways to analyze and kind of look at the questions that have long been kind of dogging American universities, and I think a lot of universities internationally. So what are some of the critiques of the modern university, and particularly the US university? Well, that faculty are too focused on research and not on student needs, this one, and student needs and mentoring, this broader conceptual idea, not just being in the classroom, but also mentoring their students. And part of that, it's a very long road of those criticisms, particular after Sputnik and the growth of major research and funding by the federal government and Cold War. But there were a series of reports in the 1990s by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching that really focused on inadequacies in undergraduate education, and was very critical about the focus of faculty moving away from mentoring and doing the kinds of things that they should be doing at major universities. And more recently, in the last 20 years or so, particularly one book that came out, but many different studies that have looked at this, or looking at time management and all these things, saying the students don't learn enough during college. They're inadequately prepared for careers, this kind of thing. This is a broad stroke. Just to kind of remind you that we're really looking at research-intensive universities, but this is a broad stroke about American higher education. And there was this book called Academically Adrift, hence our title. And that focused on a very limited set of data that was called the Collegiate Learning Assessment Test that was later attempted to adopt by the OECD to do it, ALO, if you remember that, trying to say, how can learning outcomes, no, are students learning anything? Well, let's have a test, let's figure out how to do that. And it was really kind of a bust, but it generated here in the US a lot of, this one study particularly, a lot of media attention and like things like the Wall Street Journal and that kind of. The curriculum lacks rigor, you know, this creeping sense that it's politically biased. Graduation rates are low. Well, that varies by the sector. And that's one thing to remind yourself if you don't know or sense about American higher education, tremendous diversity of providers, community colleges, vocational schools, liberal arts colleges, comprehensive universities that are, you know, more MA and below, and PhD granting. So it's a very diverse group, and there are different kinds of graduation rates. These major public universities that we're looking at have very high graduation rates. Increasing intolerance to political environments. I already kind of mentioned that, but the other one is to note there has been the kind of a development of a red state, blue state divide on how in polls, how people perceive higher education, as whether it's contributing to society and democracy or distracting from democracy and creating liberal elites and these kinds of things. So next slide. But I think one of our complaints about that is most of these studies that have been done in the past, or various things have been written about higher education, they have a very narrow concept of what constitutes the student experience. You know, research universities in the United States have perhaps the strongest tradition in the world of public service, you know, dating back to the concept of the Morrill Act and the Land-Grant Act, and this concept that universities were there to both promote democracy and economic development, but you know, and also socioeconomic mobility. And there's a broad kind of agenda that has been developed early on, what they call the third way in much of the world, but it's been a part of the DNA of these institutions to begin with. So you know, a lot of the studies have been very focused on you know, how much homework they're doing. Time in the classroom without the broader concept, excuse me, of what they're doing when they're at a major comprehensive university, which is residential as well. So that critiques don't have that data, or to look at the multifaceted nature of student experiences and the nature of the kinds of things they're doing in a variety of ways outside of the classroom. Not that the classroom isn't super important, not at all, but there are the others kind of activities they're engaged with. Igor? So, you know, again, I've already kind of said this, but this counter narrative, well, is there another narrative besides students aren't learning enough? Can we kind of understand more broadly what they're doing? And we're noting a report here, a follow-up report to the Boyer report of, well, there were actually two Boyer reports in the 1990s that led to a lot of efforts and reforms at major research universities. Not the only cause, but it really launched a lot of activities to kind of reassess how undergraduate students specifically fit into the university, and how they could be mentored better and educated better, and that kind of thing. So so you know, this concept which you know goes back to the very strong British tradition, Cardinal Newman and these kinds of things, of a broadly educated person, and that there are these different kinds of aspects and talents, different talents that people have, and how they can be integrated into an educational experience. So this concept of diverse pathways is a kind of an ongoing and growing kind of movement about talking about students, that they're not just one student experience, but many, and that they you know, have different ways of navigating through the university. So I'm sorry, this was a follow-up report by a group called, very similar to ours, the undergraduate experience in the research university. I think I got that right. And in any case, we've been aligned with them some, and they had a major report out about this as well. So Igor, next slide. So what are some of the reforms that universities have pursued? And I will say I've been around the University of California a long time. And when I was in Santa Barbara in the 90s and had a position there, I was engaged in some of the workshops or organized some of the workshops around the Boyer Report and what kinds of things the university could be doing better uh, uh, in terms of undergraduate education. So among the many innovations that have been done, teaching and learning centers, curricular innovations, changes in general ed, which is again a very American structure of students come in, they don't know that they're not physics majors necessarily, that they take 2 years and then they go on. That model is changing over time, but there are all these other kinds of aspects. First year seminars that are smaller, and these large universities, we have often very large classes. So the structure is how can it integrate more small classroom experiences, leveraging campus opportunities for students. So one I'm noting is the Berkeley Discovery Program, which is you see various at Michigan or Virginia or other places like that, efforts to try to provide pathways for students to find resources and what they might do in their and how they can take advantage of the many kinds of activities and things that are going on. Bolstering academic advising, we're seeing AI structured more and more into that. Large growth in undergraduate research opportunities. That's one of the major changes that came out of the 1990s. And there's a lot of money now for that. And in fact, in many fields, you really have to have undergraduate experience, research experience and so forth if you're going to go on to graduate school. And many of these students in these major universities, yes, they are going to the labor market, but many are also looking to further their education, at least until we see how the AI world plays out. Career support services and expanded networks, lots of more opportunities for internships and links with industry and business in the private sector, more and more civic learning courses and structuring that into the curriculum, elevating teaching and mentoring of the faculty advancement. So there's always this question, well, how much is teaching and mentoring linked into actual faculty hiring and advancement? And what I will say is that, and that research is supreme. Research is definitely still the weightiest aspect of faculty advancement and hiring, but they've integrated at places like the University of California very structured efforts to look at the multiple ways that that faculty engage with undergraduate students and graduate students, and there is a change and reform in that area that has emphasized the importance of teaching and accountability and related to that. And then, we've been generating more and more data and ways to assess this, and the SERU project is one of those. Igor. So now we're transitioning to, well, could we answer some of these questions, look at these questions about whether students are academically adrift or engaged at these large public research universities. And, in the study that we did, Igor was the lead in this, and I joined him with Greg Thompson, who's a long-term colleague on the project, the SERU Consortium. And, we kind of looked at we want to look historically at criticisms about research universities related to undergraduate education. And, within that bound is Clark Kerr's very famous speech, or a series of talks he gave at Harvard University in 1963, in which he brought forth this concept of the multiversity or multi-university, and that there was this huge, these universities were changing very quickly. And one of the things is, the metaphor went from, well, these institutions used to be thought of as villages, and now they're more like, they are cities of infinite variety. They're so large. We have at Berkeley around 45,000 students, including graduate students, and the size and scope of these institutions, even compared to 30, 40 years ago, is just gigantic. And of course, it reflects the growth of knowledge and different kinds of fields that have been developed. That's what we're here for, partly, right? So, but the one concern that Kerr had also was some get lost in the city, right? So how good a job are universities doing to help students find pathways that meet their particular needs, interests, and talents? and moving forward towards graduation, of course, but also what kind of experiences they have that will make them better citizens, more productive in the labor market, maybe good at creating startups. Berkeley likes to say that we're the #1 startup campus in the world, and there's lots of data to maybe show that, but that's a basic, one of the outcomes in the modern world. So Igor? So a couple of assumptions, and then we'll go to Igor here in our structure, and it relates to the SERU project generally. That is, there's no one student experience. It's not a mass thing. You have to get nuance. You have data. You got to look into it. Student experiences are not isolated. They are integrated into various kinds of forms of experiences, and they're interconnected. And so they also will see very much, and this is one of the things we want to explore, the differences in disciplines. Yes, also backgrounds of students. We have probably the most rich amount of data about the background of the students, first generation immigrant, did their parents go, get a PhD, these kinds of things. So personally, but also the disciplines really, really matter. And we can see this in the data as we go forward. Igor. So here's the mapping that we decided in looking at a longitudinal data set that Igor will describe. And it relates again to the structure of the SERU surveys. We have an undergraduate survey and a graduate student survey. And the undergraduate survey links into this kind of conceptual model, very basic and straightforward, but academic engagement, research engagement, extracurricular activities, civic engagement, and career development. Again, extracurricular activities could be being the president of the Beyonce fan club or these kinds of things. And this is a major component at these large public universities in the United States. It's not that the others aren't really super important, but there's lots of students that are active in different kinds of ways when they make their way through the university. Igor.
All right. Thank you, John, and it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting us. And so now, with everything that John outlined, how does it look with the actual data on student experience at research-intensive universities? So we had 4 research questions, and we may not have time to go through all of them, but this report is published, and everything that we present today you can find in this. I'm not sure, David, if the link was shared at some point, but we're happy to share it in chat as well. So 4 research questions: to what extent does various forms of student engagement, academic, research, career, extracurricular, and civic, they're mutually exclusive, they're independent, they're correlated, meaning that there's like a small population of students who are doing everything and the majority are doing nothing, or students find their own path within the university. Our second question is how these forms of multi-engagement vary across disciplines, across student characteristics. Then we looked at how different forms of engagement associated with student grades, self-reported learning outcomes, satisfaction, and belonging. And we also explored, since this data was collected starting in early 2010s, we explored what were the trends in student experience when we consider this various modes of engagement, and what's the impact of COVID-19 on student engagement. And so just if you're not familiar with the project, the data for this study comes from a SERU Consortium, and John is a founding principal investigator of this, and I am a senior researcher and SERU Consortium director currently. So this is a member-run and non-for-profit consortium of universities that collaborate by administering both undergraduate and graduate survey. We will only report data from the undergraduate survey, but there are some interesting trends in graduate graduate students as well. And so these universities collaborate by sharing SERU benchmark data and best practices, and also using this data for institutional self-improvement and collaboration. And over the years, we've had more than 40 universities partner with us on this, collected 1.5 million student responses, and we'll show a fraction of those in the presentation today, and also we've had a lot of different conferences, and there's publications. There's more than 200 publications, and so this is a very rich source of data, both for higher education policy, but also for research, for academic research. And most importantly, the data is available to external researchers, and there's a process that you can go through to get it. It's not that complicated. So this is what the data comes from, and as you can see, total we have over 800,000 students that completed the survey. And on the right hand side, you can see the type of universities that contributed the data to the study. And it's important to note that all of them are large public research intensive universities in the United States. And these are universities that enroll more than half of STEM students, for example, in the U.S. So it's a very distinct type of university, but at the same time, it's kind of a more accessible. It's not like elite private universities. It's large research universities that are flagship in this country. And every cycle we had over 100,000 kind of student responses, so we can track how how experience of students at this university has changed over time. In terms of methods, what we did, there are two kind of important points to make. So in order to explore how these various forms of engagement varied across student characteristics, across time, we created indices for each type of engagement. For example, we have an index on academic engagement. And the way this indices are constructed, there's like a series of survey items that student completed, whether they participated in class discussion, whether they interacted with faculty, and the more activities they did within a particular area, the higher the index, basically. And it's measured from 0 to 100, and we kind of define high engagement as belonging to the top quartile of the distribution. So basically, if I'm saying like these are students who engaged, like have high extracurricular engagement, that means they comparatively belong to like top 25 of the top 25% of the distribution. And then we did a series of basically regression models with covariates that kind of student characteristics that can affect engagement, and estimated university level fixed effects as well. And then we also look trends over time. Not sure how detailed I will be able to show you, but we kind of looked at both one snapshot at a time, pre-pandemic period. We examined kind of a pre-pandemic period as a reference period, and then the years after up to 2023. We have data for 2024 as well, and we look forward to adding that to the data set and kind of updating the report and looking at the current trends as well. And everything that will show our control for student gender, student race, ethnicity, social class, student level, and field of study. So this is kind of all adjusted for those student characteristics. So now to the findings, and just to give you like a high level preview. So when we apply this model that John described to U.S. public universities, we see that most undergraduates, 2/3 of undergraduates, are highly engaged. Again, they are top 25% of the distribution in at least 5 of those areas. So that means in terms of whether, a small group of students doing everything versus everyone finds their own path within this university, it's probably the latter. So we see that they are engaged in at least one area, either academic or extracurricular or civic or research or career. And among senior, this actually figure rises to over 85%. So meaning that even if students are not engaged in the classroom or less engaged in the classroom, they find other ways to find meaning within the university, and universities provide much more than the classroom experience. Second, there are significant equity gaps related to gender, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic background. So some students get more opportunities for engagement than others. Third, we also see big disciplinary differences, and disciplines majors, they shape how students kind of experience the university tremendously. Um, there's also a strong association between the forms of engagement and various outcomes measured by student GPAs, grade point average, grades, self-reported skill proficiency levels engaged, and so basically, that allows us to conclude that all these different forms of engagement, they also work towards distinct positive outcomes for students. We also see that these forms of engagement associated with different career preferences and aspirations, student plans. And but despite this kind of a positive findings, we also see that the overall landscape of engagement, of multi-engagement, declined across all those areas since the COVID-19 pandemic. And most importantly, our last measure is after the considered after the pandemic in 2022, and we don't see like a full recovery to the pre-pandemic level. Again, we need to add 2024 data to the mix and see whether that holds, but that's not very encouraging. And it looks like the pandemic took a much larger toll on the universities, on students, on faculty that was considered. So let me show some of those results again. I won't be able to show you everything, but this report is published, and you can explore the details. So now to the first finding, that 2/3 of undergrads are highly engaged when you consider multiple forms of engagement. This is how by the way, the distributions of engagement look. You see that and this is the index measured from 0 to 100, and this index is constructed based on the individual survey items that students complete. And as you can see, the kind of academic engagement, the green one, is a normal distribution, and all others, they have right skewed distribution, meaning that very few students participate actively. But even despite that, when we look at the overlap between those 5 areas of engagement, you can see that kind of almost 2/3 of undergraduates, they are highly engaged. They belong to top 25% in at least one area. And as you can see, seniors, they kind of show more engaged. The larger the circle, the higher the engagement. As you can see, like freshmen, they have active academic engagement, civic engagement, not a lot of career engagement, extracurricular, less research. And when you move from freshmen to seniors, this is the last year of study, you can see that they report much higher levels of engagement. Now, this is a little bit hard to kind of comprehend initially, but this is actually a very useful way to look at the intersections of those 5 areas. And the closest kind of a parallel to that is the Venn diagram for like 3 areas. You can see 3 circles and how they interact, but we have 5 areas. And here you can see how those 5 areas kind of interact. What's the percent of intersection between those kind of areas, and as you can see, not a lot of students, they actually have like high level of intersection between things. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, or maybe there's a way to like do a laser pointer. Yeah, can you see the laser pointer?
Yeah.
Hopefully. Yeah, so here, for example, you can see that academic and civic engagement, only 3% of students belong to the top quartile in both. And here you can see that only 2% belong in top quartile in all 5 areas of engagement: extracurricular, civic, career, academic, and research. Which means that, again, to the point of whether a few students, they're active in everything, or students find their ways within those areas, it's again, it's the latter. Now, not so positive side of things, that again, there are big equity gaps related to engagement. And one kind of an area that concerns me the most, and one example that I think is striking from this,
is that if you are a student from a wealthy or like upper middle class or wealthy family, you have 3 times higher chance to assist faculty with their research if you compare it if you are students from low income family. Everything else kind of a constant. So students from higher socioeconomic background, they have much better opportunities, much better chances, and that I think is a concerning outcome of this study. And there are also other types of disparities based on gender, based on race, that we document in the study. Now, again, we also find, we knew that when we started the study, but we find this empirically, that there are a lot of differences by major. And this is like a heat map that shows the relative strength of engagement within a discipline. So, for example, you can see economics here, and you can see that in economics, students demonstrate relatively higher extracurricular engagement than other types of engagement. The darker the color, the higher the engagement. Or like political science as well. In chemistry, it's research that dominates compared to other areas. Is the same in biology. Whereas my favorite subject is sociology, and as you can see, the academic engagement doesn't concern a lot of sociology students compared to other areas. And so that kind of a heat map illustrates that there are a lot of differences by discipline, and disciplines. There are more differences within universities than across universities, just because disciplines are so important. Now what we can see is how those students that are active in different areas, they select their majors, they select their disciplines of study, and we see a lot of differences. Students who are academically engaged, their major kind of a driver of their selection is intellectual curiosity. Then for career, it's not surprisingly career preparation. For civic engagement and for research, these are grad school preparation. And what's interesting for extracurriculars, they don't have like a very distinct reason, but the most popular one is prestige. So those who are engaged in extracurriculars, they tend to select their major based on prestige consideration, which is I think an interesting kind of an interesting approach to kind of validate that these experiences, they both attract different types of students, and they probably shape their orientations towards their studies. Now, in terms of outcomes, so we have several types of outcomes. We have these surveys, they are merged with administrative records. So we observed some of the administrative records of those students, and we also ask them a series of questions about how their skills changed from when they started to where they are at the time of the survey, and also about their plans. And so this is the plot that shows how assessment of current skill levels. Sorry, I'm hearing echo. I'm not sure why is that. So this plot shows the distribution of various skill levels by areas and engagement types. And as you can see, for most of the skills and GPA, these are grades. These are not self-reported. This is administratively recorded. All of them are on the positive side. Like this is like if it's below 0, except 1. If it's below 0, then it's kind of a negative association. If it's above 0, it's positive association. And the strength of kind of a association helps you to understand whether the relationship is strong or weak. And the good news is that all of these experiences looks like give a positive contribution to to student self-reported skills, except for one, extracurricular activities like student clubs and organizations. They're negatively associated with GPA, which probably not surprising because it's there is a trade-off in time and effort. But all others, and as you can see, green is academic engagement. Academic engagement usually has the highest, except for a couple of areas. One is leadership skills, and another where extracurriculars dominate, and the ability to conduct research where research engagement dominates. But what's interesting, if you look at gains as opposed to level, you see that extracurricular activities, they actually are more meaningful in, again, developing leadership skill way more than all other forms of engagement, social skills, oral communication skills, understanding international perspectives. So, but again, all of them are kind of positively contributing to gains across areas. All of them are important for developing kind of a satisfaction and belonging and positively correlated, except for one, again, it's extracurricular activities. They're negatively associated with satisfaction with grades. And again, not surprisingly, because students, they tend to have lower grades who are extracurricularly engaged. And finally, what's interesting is that, again, similar to different reasons that the students have for selecting their major, they also report different types of career plans and aspirations. And as you see, for example, this is the plans they report, and this is in the brackets. This is the top kind of top type of the engagement that dominates. And as you can see, those students who are highly engaged in civic activities, they plan to work part-time, study, work abroad, or do like unpaid internship or volunteer. Those who are engaged in research, they plan to enroll in graduate and professional schools. What's interesting is this, I think, is that those with career orientation, they're more likely to be self-employed, to be entrepreneurs. And speaking of that kind of a startup culture, that John described, this may contribute to higher startup culture. And again, what's positive about this is that students who are highly engaged in at least one of these areas, they're more likely to have plans. And all of these areas form different forms of engagement are negatively associated with the point, I have no idea kind of at this point what I want to do. So the students, they think they know what they want to do after school. So, and just to I don't have a lot of time to show you the trends, I'll just tell you the big picture. So the big picture is the different types of kind of engagement. Some of them declined, some of them recovered. Especially what's recovered is usually whatever happens in class. But whatever happens outside of class, either decline or there's not kind of a lot of change. Again, time spent studying declined. It was declining even before the pandemic. In class engagement, rebound. I want to show just one chart here. Sorry. Yeah, this is the research engagement, for example. As you can see, research engagement was pretty stable. This is pre-pandemic to pre-pandemic years. And during the pandemic, it started to decrease, and it's continuing to decrease. Again, we don't show 2024 here, but there is probably a decline that continues, or maybe there's a rebound. We're going to see. This is one of my favorite questions in the survey. We asked students how many professors do they know well enough to ask for a letter of recommendation. And this kind of shows the connections between faculty and students that are built. And this is what happens with, with the responses of students to this particular question. Again, it declined during the pandemic, probably reflecting all these universities during these years. They went through enrollment growth. And as you can see, this kind of a decline slightly even before the pandemic, but then during the pandemic, there's a big dip, and again, it's not recovered, and there's something that happened with a student-faculty interaction that don't allow to build the connections that that existed before. So yeah, not but we don't want to end with a kind of a negative note here. So I'll turn it over to John for implications and conclusions.
Well, again, we did note that there were a lot of reforms in undergraduate ed, and I think in some forms there are in Europe and other parts of the world. But there hasn't really been any data-driven frameworks to find out what the effectiveness of it is. I mean, it's kind of astounding that we have these major research universities throughout the world, and many are not really engaged in trying to understand what's happening to their students beyond very rudimentary standards like getting a job or graduating. So we think that this model it is data driven, and it's unique in that we have institutions that are engaged in collecting it and having institutional data sets that are probably unique in the world. But this provides a model to kind of explore larger questions. I think we would like to know, as Igor noted, whether we could see some patterns. These are other questions we kind of have in our minds, whether there has been additional improvement in the engagement levels and activities of students after COVID, and we had to get another data set. We stagger usually, not always. It depends on the institution, but undergraduate once every 2 years, graduate every 2 years. So it's so the last cohort for the big publics in the United States is 2024. So, but we'll have more data eventually. But we'd like to kind of look at that. I think we want to further explore equity gaps in terms of our project. And, we still think that there's a lot of need to delve into this data, particularly in the United States, but with the Trump era coming on, and we don't know quite what the impacts will be fully on undergraduate experiences. Excuse me. There will be resource questions. For example, undergraduate research, there's significant funding, and has been, from the NSF for campuses to bolster their efforts, although they use their own internal funds as well. It's a huge infrastructure related to now supporting undergraduate research and getting students in labs and more experience in this area. So we may see some real changes. There's also, questions about how students feel, a sense of belonging, and these kinds of things that we're going to have to, we have data sources to look at as we see the Trump era come in. And, the other thing is we've tried to say to our members, and that this model shows a lot of nuance. Sometimes that's too much nuance, perhaps, for public consumption, but to talk to legislators, or lawmakers, I should say, and the public about what kind of things we're doing. But that requires too, we're doing this meta kind of overall look at the various institutions. Individual institutions need to apply this, and we do have campus comparisons. We didn't put this in the report. There's a lot of reasons for that, but that's an area, we didn't want to have Michigan versus Berkeley, this kind of dynamic. That's not what we have. We do have that data though, but we were encouraging institutions to use their own data to look at what's happening at their campuses, where their strengths are, where their weaknesses are. And then, so finally, just to say, in terms of the international audience, is, we've been trying and have had some success in the past with having international members joining in and using the data, and having access to benchmark data from the U.S. side of these major public universities, which are both your colleagues and your competitors in various ways. That we would hope that other institutions would think about trying to develop data that they can use, as opposed to government imposed surveys that basically don't give you any kind of disaggregation of the data set of people, who they are, and it's basically useless data in terms of institutional self-improvement. We're not interested in what the government wants so much, except for to perhaps provide messaging about what's really happening. But the institutions need to look at this. And one other area I'll say in relationship to that, and try to make this argument with some universities in the continent, is that if you engage more with this kind of data, you might have a better sense of where you are in your SDG goals, or sustainable development goals, and these kinds of things. So with that, thanks very much for listening, and back to you, David.
Great, thank you very much, Igor and John. You've given us lots to think with. It's really interesting. As an undergraduate, I was always told you could only do 3 things in Oxford well. You could do sport, you could socialize, you could study, but I think your research sort of shows that. Thank you for coming. I'm going to throw it open to the room. We've got people here in the room, online, so please do post your questions. My question for you is going to be one of practicalities. Who's funding this survey? Are the institutions themselves? It's a big, expensive project.
Go ahead, Igor.
Yeah, so this is the membership kind of a driven project, and institutions collaborate on administering the survey, and it's funded through institutions' kind of a membership fees within the consortium. The research side of it is not the main goal, but it's it's one of the also areas that helps this universities to communicate the challenges and advantages in student experience to the larger public as well. So it's both kind of institutional, within institutional improvement, and also larger kind of a higher ed policy discussion.
Yeah, but just the answer too is that the surveys are administered centrally through ETIO for various reasons over time. At one point in the US, we worked with the University of Minnesota, which has a very large survey research center, and it gets very complicated dealing with these things with, IRB and all that kind of things, but it's centrally administered. And the reason, and then there's a fee for that and a structure related to it. And we also have meetings and workshops and things like that. We have an annual meeting. We had our last one here at Berkeley. The next one will be at the University of Colorado, before we had it at Toronto with our members. And so to look at how data is being used, examples at Virginia or Texas. But so we have this other kinds of activities that relate to the consortium that are valuable to our members. But it's centrally administered so that we have, consistency in data. We have protocols on sharing data. We're very experienced in this over time. But there is a cost to the membership. But in the United States, this kind of data is, by our major universities, see it as really highly valuable. And it's worth the cost to them, and they go on a 4-year term. So yeah, that's how that functions.
Great, really interesting. Thank you. Are there any questions in the room? But we've got a couple of questions online. So Samad had to leave, but he asked the question right early on about whether is there a risk of this being turned into a new set of performance indicators? And the way you present it, I think, is that they own the data, and that isn't a challenge because it's not going to be decontextualized. I mean, it is already quite multi-level. What are your thoughts on that?
John, you want to say? Yeah, I'm happy to start. In there's always a risk. Anything good can be turned into performance indicators in evaluation, kind of assessment evaluation exercise. Sometimes it's actually good so that universities can prioritize things. But here, I think the major goal of this was to show that universities provide much more than just a classroom experience. And I don't think this aspect of kind of a university operation is very well communicated to the public and to the funders as well. And survey data is limited in many ways. But there's just not a better data to show, research engagement by students or civic engagement by students. And we also see from that data that this helps with kind of a student outcomes, however you measure them, again, with, all the limitations that they are. So I don't think there is like a big risk this will be, this will be a ranking or like accountability metric.
for one reason, because it's kind of initiated by universities themselves, and they, they use this data for institutional improvement because they just want to get, provide students with better education, and they want to be accountable to the public. Again, this is public universities, so the accountability angle is important. So yeah, John, do you want to add anything?
Well, I understand the concern and about the, how things are used by governments and ranking and all that. I would say in the United States, that's not as big, although the world is changing with Mr. Trump. But, there's a stronger sense of, rankings just don't play the same role that they do parts of the world. Our rankings in the U.S. are largely consumer guides. And I would say, internally as well, although this may change, with AI and all that, is that assessment of faculty or other kinds of things are not linked to kind of data-driven, citation indexes and these kinds of things. There's still a strong culture of qualitative assessment of what people are doing. So, but in any case, on the international side, perhaps there's a worry about it. But the fact of the matter is we're kind of a boutique operation. In other words, we're the coalition of a small group of willing institutions that buy into what they want to do. It's not going to be every university doing it. And in fact, over the years, as I've tried to PR this and try to get more international members because of it's just be so interesting and also I think helpful. I've never tried to approach governments about using this data source or this survey structure, even before that really kicked in, that you see places like the Netherlands or the UK using these satisfaction surveys, which are useless largely, except for, maybe as consumer guides, kind of. Yeah, but I understand that concern, but I think it shouldn't prevent an institution wanting to know more about their students.
Okay, that's really helpful, and that does come up again. We've got about 10 minutes, but I've got several really interesting questions in the chat. Civic, do you want to start with this question you had?
Sure, thank you. First of all, great presentation. And I was just curious if you looked at transfer students or non-first-time students as a subgroup, and if those outcomes differed substantially, because I know student engagement can be a problem for their retention.
Yes, that's a great question. We did not look at the subgroup specifically, but there is a possibility, there is data whether a student is a transfer student. I think when we looked at the distribution, if I remember this correctly, they have lower engagement than compared to those that are started as freshmen. They have, especially in the extracurricular activities, just because since they only have 2 years or less years of studies, they just don't spend their time, on extracurriculars, and they engage in other things. And also, like some of the clubs, they just open to freshmen mostly, and they don't open. They don't enroll like juniors and seniors as much. So that kind of that's a limitation of the experience. But there's definitely more to explore with that model, and transfer students could be one of the subgroups.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've kind of weighed how many subgroups we're going to look at, and this, if you look at the report, it's quite large and extensive. So it was quite an ordeal just to get into this longitudinal data set, which is unique. I think there's nothing like it anywhere in the world. So, but there are other areas, and we wanted to encourage, and I don't know if we're going to be successful in getting our members to take a look at their own campuses, and so like transfer students, and just for our international audience to understand, at a place like Berkeley and most of the UC campuses, University of California, about 28% of the students at the undergraduate level are transfer students, almost all from community colleges, but not completely. So they have a certain kind of, a different background profile in many ways. But for example, we should really look in California at Latino students and what their experiences are. And we did do some research earlier on, not with this model, on that to see what kind of levels of engagement they had. And we found in the earlier research some time ago that Latino students were like incredibly engaged in various forms, very intense, very, very strong learning outcomes. There are ways that we could interpret why that's a good thing, or why universities might focus on socioeconomic mobility. And here's a group that not everyone is low income, but there is a lot of lower income first generation students. So I really would like Berkeley to take a look at that subgroup, but we've created a framework, and now there's an opportunity to do all kinds of delving into subgroups.
Thanks so much.
Brilliant, thank you both. Nicola Dandridge, would you like to ask your question about student engagement?
Yes, thank you. A great presentation. Thank you both so much. I just wondered the extent to which the measurement student engagement was more or in part a reflection of the student's own contribution as opposed to anything coming from the university, and whether that mattered from your point of view, particularly given that I imagine students with stronger social capital and more privileged backgrounds are probably going to have the ability to engage across your 5 metrics. So I'd be interested in your views on that. Can I just also add very quickly, I mean, I would have thought if this approach was used by commercial rankings, that would be a fantastic thing. I mean, I personally think that the international rankings are awful in terms of the measures that they use. So I would encourage that. Not government necessarily, but the international ones I would have thought was really a ripe area for exploitation. Anyway, thank you both.
Thank you. I love this question. I think this is a great thing to kind of think about. And I think it's both. It's kind of a combination of student backgrounds and the experiences and whatever universities are doing. And there are two reasons to think that. One is that, again, we see big equity gaps and socioeconomic disparities in access to engagement. Again, one example that I gave is assistant faculty with research is usually unpaid. And students who are coming from low-income families, they have less opportunities just because they need to work usually, and it's a privilege to actually work with faculty member on a research project, unless it's funded or specifically invites low-income students. And second, we see a lot of differences by discipline, and second, to argue that there's also kind of a university contribution, we see a lot of differences by disciplines. And I don't think they are explained fully by students selecting into majors. I think they really provide different types of experiences to students. And so I think it's a combination of the two. But this data does not allow to say, oh, it's 80% university and 20% students. It's probably we need to collect some other data to argue that.
Great, thank you both. And great question, yeah, really interesting. Glenn, do you want to come in quickly about your question around a private university applying this sort of data?
Thank you, David. Can you hear me?
You can indeed, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks to this to both researchers. This is really a fascinating study. I represent a private university, a private Catholic university here in the Kingdom of Thailand, and we are mostly focused on the applied sciences curriculum. Okay, at undergraduate level, we kind of broaden at graduate level to a certain extent. But I mean, your study, I think, mostly addresses the undergraduate situation. My question to you is, how can we really apply your model to an applied sciences university at undergraduate level? Have you ever thought about it, or would you ever venture into that scenario? Thank you.
There's only one way to approach this. We should try and see what happens, and collect more data from private schools as well. Historically, I think in the US at least, private schools, they were less interested because they don't have such kind of a public accountability requirements than public schools. They're also smaller, they maybe have kind of a better touch with students to some extent through other channels as opposed to surveys. But I think it can be, and it's just this model of private universities private university focused on applied sciences would emphasize different types of student experience, and this model can look slightly different, but I don't think why not. Yeah.
I'll only note that, at least we've had some international participants. We can't quite tell exactly how the data has gone, like Tanji University has done the undergraduate survey at first, but they didn't do the graduate survey, did they, Igor? I don't think so, but
only undergrad. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, only undergrad.
Only undergrad. So we have had universities doing that. I mean, applying the model versus just having at least the data to explore, are kind of two different questions. But we want international members. It's been difficult, and I think with the political environment about sharing data, like we have Chinese members, but it's kind of now we don't know where we are with them right now, including Beijing. Peking University, I should say, and we just don't know where we are. So the data sharing, but we really would like to engage internationally with more institutions and in the project and using the survey data for self-improvement.
Brilliant. We probably should wrap up really quickly, but we have got two questions still in the chat. I don't know if Vedika and Camille, you could ask your questions really briefly, and then Igor and John can wrap up in 30 seconds each.
Sure.
Camille.
Yeah, thanks, David. Really quick, I was just wondering what you would think of your suggestions to applying the sort of survey that you ran to like the UK context, and whether you would recommend sort of running it across a broad sector. If I don't know how familiar you are with our teaching excellence framework, but if you would sort of suggest it's something you think you would either say don't do it because you're going to end up with more problems than you want, or whether actually you think it could help kind of solve some of the problems that we have in the UK of addressing issues of different types of ways that students engage in higher education across the sector.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a tough question for us Americans, I think. I mean, I know it's a fair amount, some about the UK system. I guess our model has been so oriented towards not collaborating with government that it's a self-initiated, not something forced on institutions, that they're in, you need buy-in by these institutions just to get survey responses, which continues to be a challenge. So that's not been our mindset. But I think if there was an opportunity that made sense with some aspect of the survey that could fit within a framework, of course, we'd be interested in discussing with the, it's not called HEFKE anymore. See, that's how out of it I am. But I can't remember what the name of the teaching and learning group or whatever. But again, we've been kind of hesitant on that side, but we'd be interested. You really need buy-in by institutions, though, if you're going to get good response rates, and as well as that they feel that can use the data as opposed to being used as some kind of cudgel to blame this institution over that institution. So worry about that.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, good warnings and very sensible. Thank you, Camille, as well. Question. Vedika, very last comment from you?
No, just that we really appreciate.
Sorry, Vedika's coming in. She's got one last quick question.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah.
You're muted, Vedika. Oh no. Okay. It looks like Teams is not letting you have your final word. I'm really sorry. So I'll just read your question out. Vedika asked, why is it that civic engagement was lower than other forms of engagement? And have any thoughts on that?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily lower, because the way we analyzed engagement is we took the relative kind of a position within all the distribution of engagement. It's lower in a sense that less students are kind of a highly engaged than in some other areas. But it's also, I don't think there's like a direct comparison that is meaningful here in terms of who's engaged in more across forms of engagement. The indices meant to be constructed to compare within rather than kind of across. If that makes sense.
Okay, That makes sense. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, really helpful. So we better wrap up. We've gone over time. Thank you all again, both of you again, for a really great talk, and everyone for joining. We really enjoyed that. It's lots to think with. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. Okay, bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we'll put the recording in the slides. Send us the slides. We'll put the slides up as well. And the link.
Yeah, and if you do want more information about the consortium, about being now the salesman, you take a look at our website. It's easily accessible, SERU, and you know, we're interested in engagement with others internationally, whether it's for research or that maybe their institutions are interested in engaging with the consortium. Thanks.
Good. All right.
Thank you.
Nice to see you both. Thank you all. Bye bye. Thanks everyone for coming.